Last month, the European Commission unveiled its proposed budget for 2028 to 2034. This was the EU's biggest ever budget, amounting to almost €2 trillion, or 1.26% of the EU's gross national income. While it was praised for reallocating funding to Europe's priorities, including defence, security, and research and development, it was criticised by some member states for generally being too big, with a German government spokesperson calling the increase unacceptable at a time when all member states are making considerable efforts to consolidate their national budgets. So in this video, we'll explain the EU's proposed new budget, what's good and bad about it, and why it's being controversial. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. First though, we should start with some context about the EU's budget itself. The EU's long-term budget, officially the Multi-Annual Finance Framework, or MFF, is established for a period of at least 5 years and sets out the bloc's spending priorities. Within that, the EU also adopts an annual budget each year, with specific amounts agreed under the long-term budget. For the current 2021-2027 budget, there are 7 broad spending categories, reflecting the Commission's emphasis on digital transition and the Green Deal. For the 2028-2034 budget, however, the EU has stated its priorities more directly. As you'll notice, some of these, notably the first one, investing in people, member states and regions, are somewhat unclear, and we'll get on to why this is later. Overall though, the proposed budget reflects the EU's new priorities, namely defence, security and competitiveness. Anyway, let's move on to some of the budget's main proposals. First up, under the heading Driving Prosperity via Competitiveness, Research and Innovation, is the creation of a single new European Competitiveness Fund, which will invest in strategic technologies focused on 4 areas: decarbonisation, the digital transition, health, biotech, agriculture and bioeconomy, and defence and space. This builds on some of the recommendations from the 2024 Draghi report, which argued that the EU needs to invest more strategically, and in many cases more deeply via joint borrowing, into areas like clean technology and defence, in order to de-risk, i.e. reduce its reliance on imports. This change signals a more targeted and simplified investment strategy compared to the current 2021-27 budget, which rather vaguely aimed to step up investment in areas such as research and innovation, digital transformation, strategic infrastructure, and the single market. To this end, the budget also proposes a near doubling of funding for the EU's research and development programme Horizon Europe to €175 billion from €95 billion currently. Moving on, under Protecting Europe, the budget proposes a 5-fold increase in defence funding compared to the current budget, allocating €131 billion to support investment in defence, security and space. There will also be a 10-fold increase in funding for military mobility via Connecting Europe facility transport projects, i.e. the transport infrastructure that can be used for both civilian and military purposes. These changes also work towards the establishment of a European Defence Union by 2030, designed to facilitate greater collaboration on defence, build an EU-wide defence market, and close critical capability gaps. This section also triples funding for migration management, with €81 billion allocated to boost member states' law enforcement capabilities and fully digitise border control. Then, under Building Partnerships for a Stronger Europe in the World, the budget allocates €200 billion for the EU's Global Europe instrument, for things like international development and tackling climate change, plus an additional €100 billion for Ukraine. Perhaps the most notable change to the EU's budget, though, comes under its first heading, investing in people, member states and regions. The EU's plan here is to combine dozens of programmes into what it calls national and regional partnership plans, which aim to give national governments more leeway on spending. Essentially, this means that the funding for 2 previously separate programmes, the Common Agricultural Policy and the Cohesion Policy, which aims to reduce regional economic disparities, will now be merged into a single pot. This will work similarly to the EU's post-pandemic recovery fund, with national governments proposing spending plans to be approved by the EU and checked against delivery for the release of funds. The reasoning here, according to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, is the regions know the situation on the ground better and can manage it better. And so, instead of having several different programs with the risk of overlapping, we have one. Well, this decision to streamline funding was criticised by what were traditionally the largest beneficiaries of EU funds, farmers and regional authorities. The EU has pledged to ring-fence income support to farmers, although regional governments are likely to receive less. Overall, though, this should speed up the disbursement of funds and give member states more flexibility in how they're spent. But how was this budget received, and what are the good and bad things about it? Well, as we've already touched upon, the two main good things about the proposed budget are the streamlining of funding and the fact that it builds on some of the Draghi report's recommendations about how to improve European competitiveness. That being said, the budget doesn't address some of the other key Draghi report recommendations, such as boosting productivity or unifying the EU's fragmented single market, which will continue to hold Europe's economy back. Another point of criticism is the budget's proposed lump sum tax on EU companies with a net annual turnover of at least €100 million, alongside taxes on tobacco products and electric waste, as revenue from these taxes currently goes to national governments and not the EU. And this would represent yet another corporate tax slapped on top of existing ones. Lastly, the budget doesn't include measures to increase equity funding at the EU level, which analysts argue is needed for investment in European industrial and infrastructure projects. A recent report by the European Policy Centre, for instance, argues for the creation of an off-budget EU sovereignty instrument, something like a European sovereign wealth fund, to address the shortage of strategic investments in areas where Europe's sovereignty is at stake, such as AI, chips, quantum, robotics, or clean tech. The fact that this is lacking from the proposal probably reflects the Commission's reluctance to open up a politically heated debate on joint borrowing, which Germany, the Netherlands and Sweden all oppose, while France and Italy are pushing for more. Finally, the new proposal was also widely criticised by diplomats for the way it was drafted. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's team reportedly prepared the budget secretly, with EU commissioners from the member states only given the final figures for their country's funding minutes before a meeting scheduled to rubber stamp the proposal, despite requesting more notice. However, von der Leyen has rejected this criticism, saying that she spoke to each and every commissioner one after the next, while acknowledging that there was a lot of contention. Not everyone was satisfied. The budget dispute also reinforces long-standing complaints about von der Leyen's heavily centralised decision-making, which some officials say has tightened even further compared to her first term. So the next few years will see budget negotiations that won't just highlight tensions between member states, but may also indicate member states' feelings towards the European Commission President herself. Everything we've discussed in today's video plays into a broader sense of uncertainty in the world at the moment. And who's so often at the middle of all of that? Well, the United States. So in the next issue of our magazine, Too Long, we're discussing this geopolitical shift and whether we're currently observing the end of the American order. In that section, we discuss everything from the collapse of democratic norms in the US, to the decline of American soft power, to issues with the US economy, or the battle for universities, before discussing who could potentially take over in a post-American world. So if you want to find out what we really think, now's your chance. It's not just the US though. This issue is our longest ever at 78 pages, full of our very best journalism and analysis. So we also get into why Germany's military might is growing, if Farage could become the UK's next Prime Minister, why countries are outsourcing their migrants, why the global order is collapsing with Professor James Kerr-Lindsay, and why leaders like Putin and Netanyahu seem to be getting away with it. The magazine has now officially been published, so if you order a copy today, we'll ship it as soon as we can. Or if you select the digital edition, we'll send a digital version of Too Long straight to your inbox. Plus, if you want the very best deal, you should make sure you subscribe to Too Long. That way, not only do you get every issue going forward, but you'll also get 20% off every copy as long as you're a member. On top of that, this week only, if you use code LASTCHANCE20, you'll get an additional 20% off this copy, bringing down the cost from £9.99 to £6.40 for the digital edition, or £13.99 to £8.96 for the physical edition. This really is your last chance too. From next month, all new subscribers won't receive this issue of Too Long, instead having to wait until December's The New Middle East issue. So if you want the reduced subscriber pricing on this issue, this really is your last chance. As we outlined in our recent video on TLDR's finances, TLDR actually made a loss last year, and too long is a big part of our plan to make TLDR profitable in 2025 in order to continue funding the free videos that we make every day. So if you want to be part of that, then head to toolong.news and subscribe today.